Thomas Hartwell's weathered hands trembled as he pushed open the doors of the packed church-turned-infirmary, the young Apache woman beside him clutching a bundle of herbs. Dozens of fever-stricken townspeople lay dying on makeshift beds, their labored breathing filling the suffocating air. Behind them, an angry mob gathered with torches and rifles, shouting for blood. Sheriff Morrison stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun. "Thomas, you bring that savage in here, and I'll arrest you both for murder when these people die." The rancher met his gaze steadily, knowing this moment would either save his town or destroy them all. Thomas Hartwell was 45 years old and tired of talking to cattle. 3 winters had passed since pneumonia took his wife Sarah, and the silence at his Montana ranch had grown so thick he could practically taste it. Most mornings, he'd catch himself setting 2 coffee cups on the kitchen table before remembering. The habit died hard. December of 1878 brought the kind of blizzard that made even seasoned ranchers question their life choices. Thomas should have stayed by his fireplace with a bottle of whiskey and yesterday's newspaper. Instead, he was out in the howling wind, searching for 6 head of cattle that had wandered off like rebellious teenagers. His horse stumbled through knee-deep snow, nearly throwing him face first into a drift that would have made a fine grave marker. That's when he saw something that didn't belong. Through the swirling white curtain of snow, a dark shape pressed against a massive pine tree caught his attention. Thomas squinted, wiping ice crystals from his beard. At first, he thought it might be a bear or maybe one of his missing cattle. But bears don't wear torn cavalry prison clothes, and cattle definitely don't have long black hair whipping in the wind. A young Apache woman, maybe 18 years old, was chained to that tree like some medieval prisoner. The iron shackles around her wrists had rubbed her skin raw and bloody. She was barely conscious, her lips blue with hypothermia, her body curled into itself against the brutal cold. Fresh horse tracks and military boot prints in the snow told a story Thomas didn't want to believe. Someone had left her here to die. His mind raced through the implications. Military orders were crystal clear about hostile Apache prisoners. Report them to Fort Carson immediately, no exceptions. But Sarah's dying words echoed in his memory. "Show mercy when you can, Thomas. It's what separates us from the wolves." Well, this was mercy time, and the wolves had already had their turn. Thomas pulled his tools from his saddlebags and went to work on those chains. The woman's eyes fluttered open as he broke the iron links. She watched him with the calculating wariness of someone who'd learned that survival meant studying every face for signs of violence. Smart girl. Too bad the world had given her such a harsh education. The journey back to his cabin tested every prayer Thomas remembered from childhood. The storm fought them every step, and the woman could barely stay upright in his saddle. She didn't speak, didn't complain, just gripped the saddle horn with white knuckles and endured. By the time they reached his porch, Thomas was half frozen himself and completely committed to a path that might get them both killed. Inside his cabin, Thomas worked on her frostbitten fingers and toes with the same careful attention he'd once given Sarah during her final illness. The woman observed everything: his movements, his supplies, the faded photograph of Sarah on the mantelpiece. Her dark eyes missed nothing, cataloging details like a scout preparing for battle. Through broken English and careful gestures, she indicated her name was something his tongue couldn't manage. The Apache sounds flowed like water over stones, beautiful and impossible for him to repeat. "Hope," he said finally, pointing to himself, and then to her. "I'll call you Hope, if that's acceptable." She nodded once. It was a start. The weird part was how quickly small routines developed between them. Shared meals at his kitchen table, him showing her Sarah's belongings to prove he meant no harm, her gradual revelation that she understood far more English than she initially let on. Trust building one careful gesture at a time. But outside their warm cabin, bigger storms were brewing, and Thomas was about to discover that saving one life might require risking an entire town. Over the next 3 weeks, something unexpected happened. Hope transformed from a half-frozen prisoner into the most capable ranch hand Thomas had ever worked with. She understood horses in ways that made him question 40 years of experience. When his most stubborn mare refused to let anyone near her injured hoof, Hope approached with gentle Apache words and patient hands. The horse calmed instantly. "Well, I'll be damned," Thomas muttered, watching Hope examine the hoof with practiced skill. "That mare's been ornery since the day I bought her." Hope glanced up with the hint of a smile. "Animals know fear. You approach with worry, they feel worry. I approach with peace." Her English was improving daily, revealing intelligence that military reports would never mention. She knew which plants stopped bleeding, which roots reduced fever, and which herbs could ease the pain of old injuries. Thomas's creaky joints felt better than they had in years, thanks to teas she brewed from winter bark. But it was her story that really got to him. Piece by piece, during evening conversations by the fireplace, Hope revealed what had led to those chains. 6 months earlier, she'd been gathering medicinal plants near Apache territory when she heard a child screaming. A young boy, maybe 8 years old, had been bitten by a massive rattlesnake during a cavalry patrol. The soldiers were panicking, arguing about whether to amputate his leg or ride hard for the fort. Hope emerged from the brush with her medicine bundle. The boy was Captain Morrison's son. Yes, the same Captain Morrison, who was Sheriff Morrison's brother. The kid was dying, venom spreading up his leg, turning the skin black. Hope had maybe 20 minutes to save his life. "I cut the bite," Hope explained, her fingers tracing invisible patterns in the air. "Drew out poison with sacred stones, made poultice from desert sage and white willow bark. Boy lived. Captain Morrison cried like woman when fever broke." Thomas leaned forward. "So he was grateful." Hope's expression darkened. "For 3 days, yes." Then fear came. Other soldiers asking questions. How did Apache Witch save White Child? What did she do to him? Captain Morrison realized his superiors would ask same questions. The betrayal came swift and brutal. Captain Morrison, terrified of facing court-martial for accepting help from an Apache, declared Hope a dangerous medicine woman who might have cursed his son. He sold her to traders heading for a distant reservation, pocketing military commendation money for capturing a hostile. "But here's the really sick part," Thomas said, understanding flooding through him. "Those cavalrymen were supposed to transport you safely." Hope nodded grimly. "They got drunk second night, argued about Apache woman bringing bad medicine to reservation, decided winter would solve their problem." She gestured toward the door. "Left me for snow and cold to finish." Thomas felt anger burning in his chest, like swallowed whiskey. He'd served in the cavalry himself years ago. He knew the code. Prisoners were supposed to be protected, not abandoned to die like rabid animals. Then there was the matter of growing connection between them, not romantic. Thomas was still mourning Sarah, and Hope carried grief from losing her entire family in a cavalry raid the previous spring. But something deeper was happening. Two people who'd lost everything, finding unexpected companionship in daily routines. Hope teaching him Apache healing methods, while he showed her ranch management. Both of them healing from profound losses that had left them hollow inside. Hope's perspective on survival challenged everything Thomas thought he knew about civilization. She could track game through snow that left him completely lost. She understood weather patterns in ways that made his grandmother's folk wisdom look amateur. Yet townsfolk would call her savage while considering themselves civilized. "Your people," Hope said one evening, watching him struggle with account books. "Always writing numbers on paper, counting cattle, counting money, counting days. My people count different things. How many children learn healing songs? How many elders share wisdom before dying? How many seasons pass without war?" Thomas looked up from his ledger. Different kinds of wealth, I suppose. Different kinds of wisdom, Hope corrected. Your civilization builds walls. My civilization builds knowledge. But their peaceful routine was about to get shattered by news from town. February brought word that chilled Thomas worse than any blizzard. A fever had struck Cedar Ridge, the kind that killed quickly and spread faster. Doc Hayes was overwhelmed, running on whiskey and desperation. 3 children had already died, including the blacksmith's twin daughters. More were failing daily. Thomas rode into town for supplies and returned with a face pale as winter sky. "It's bad, Hope. Real bad. Doc says he's never seen anything like it. High fever, difficult breathing, some kind of rash that spreads across the chest." Hope listened intently, asking detailed questions about symptoms, timing, and progression. Thomas watched her mind working, cataloging information like a military strategist planning battle. "I know this sickness," she said finally. "Grandfather taught me. White willow bark, elderberry, and sacred root from high mountains. But must be prepared correctly, given in right amounts. One mistake kills patient faster than fever." Thomas felt his stomach drop. "You want to help them." "I must help them." Hope's voice carried absolute certainty. "Children are dying. I have knowledge to save them. How can I stay silent?" "Because they'll kill you," Thomas said bluntly. "Hope, these people see Apache and think enemy. They won't care that you're trying to help. They'll think you're causing the sickness, not curing it." Hope began gathering herbs anyway, her movements methodical and determined. "Captain Morrison's son lived because I chose healing over fear. These children deserve same choice." Thomas knew that look. Sarah had worn it when she insisted on nursing sick neighbors during the influenza outbreak. Even while her own health was failing, some people were born to heal others. Consequences be damned. "If you're determined to do this fool thing," Thomas said, checking his rifle and loading his saddlebags, "then I'm riding with you." "You could die," Hope warned. Thomas thought about Sarah's final words, about mercy separating humans from wolves, about 3 lonely years of talking to cattle. "Maybe, but I can't live with myself if I let you face this alone." They rode toward Cedar Ridge in grim silence, smoke from funeral pyres visible against the gray sky. Hope clutched her bundle of healing herbs, while Thomas gripped his rifle. Both knew they were probably riding toward their own deaths. But sometimes doing the right thing meant accepting terrible odds. The church doors loomed ahead, and behind them, an angry mob was already gathering with torches and rifles, demanding blood. Dr. Hayes looked like he'd been wrestling death for a week straight and losing every round. His shirt was soaked with sweat, his hands shaking from exhaustion, and his eyes held the hollow stare of a man watching children die faster than he could count them. When Thomas and Hope walked through those church doors, Hayes barely glanced, up from the small boy he was trying to save. "Thomas, unless you brought a miracle in that bag, I don't have time for visitors," Hayes muttered, wiping fever sweat from the child's forehead. "Lost 2 more this morning, the Henderson girl and old Pete's grandson." The smell hit Thomas like a physical blow. Sickness, death, and desperate human fear all mixed together in air so thick you could practically chew it. Dozens of makeshift beds lined the church pews, each one holding someone fighting for their life. Parents sat beside tiny forms, whispering prayers, or just holding hands that felt too hot to touch. Sheriff Morrison stepped between them and the sick, his hand resting on his gun like it might protect him from what was coming next. "Thomas, I'm warning you. That Apache witch stays away from our people, or I'll put bullets in both of you." "Apache witch?" Hope spoke for the first time since entering, her voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Your brother's son called me angel when I saved his life from snake poison." Morrison's face went white. How did this woman know about Captain Morrison? Dr. Hayes finally looked up, really seeing Hope for the first time. His medical mind was too exhausted for prejudice, He was watching patients die while he stood there helpless. "You know healing?" he asked quietly. Hope knelt beside the sick boy Hayes had been treating. Her fingers touched his forehead, checking pulse points Thomas didn't even know existed. White willowbark fever, elderberry for breathing, sacred root to stop rash from spreading to heart. She looked directly at Hayes. "You have seen this pattern." That's exactly right," Hayes whispered. "How did you know about the heart complications?" "I've only seen that in 2 cases. My grandfather treated this sickness for 60 winters. Taught me the signs." Hope was already opening her herb bundle, sorting plants with practiced efficiency. But must work quickly. Boy has maybe 2 hours before fever damages his mind. The crowd pressed closer, torn between desperation and generations of taught hatred. Thomas watched faces change as Hope began working. Fear mixed with hope, mixed with confusion. Their children were dying, but an Apache woman offered salvation. Hope moved from bed to bed with methodical precision. She brewed teas from bark that smelled like bitter earth, made poultices from roots that released sharp, clean scents, whispered Apache healing songs that seemed to calm even the most restless patients. Her hands never hesitated, never showed doubt. The first sign came after an hour. Little Sally Morrison, no relation to the sheriff, just unfortunate name, had been burning with fever for 3 days. Her mother was preparing funeral clothes when Hope's tea began working. Sally's fever broke like storm clouds parting. Color returned to cheeks that had been death pale. Then the blacksmith's remaining daughter opened her eyes for the first time in 2 days. Then, old Pete started breathing without that horrible rattling sound. One by one, Hope pulled them back from death's doorway. Dr. Hayes worked beside her now, learning techniques that weren't in any medical textbook. "Where did you study?" he asked, grinding willow bark the way she'd shown him. "Apache University," Hope replied with the faintest smile. "Classes held under stars. Final exams involved keeping people alive." The crowd's mood shifted like weather changing. Parents who'd wanted to shoot Hope an hour earlier now watched her with something approaching reverence. Sheriff Morrison found himself in the awkward position of threatening to arrest someone who'd just saved his neighbor's children. But the real test was still coming. Through the church windows, dust clouds appeared on the horizon. Captain Morrison was riding hard toward town with a full cavalry unit, and Thomas knew those soldiers weren't coming to deliver thank-you notes. The healing had been the easy part. Now came the reckoning that would determine whether Hope lived to heal anyone else. Captain Morrison rode into Cedar Ridge like he was leading a charge against hostile territory. 20 cavalrymen flanked him, their rifles gleaming in the afternoon sun. But what they found wasn't exactly what military manuals prepared them for. Inside the church, Hope was teaching Dr. Hayes how to mix elderberry extract, while 3 formerly dying children played quietly in the corner. Parents who'd been preparing funeral clothes were now bringing Hope fresh water and thanking her in whispered voices. Sheriff Morrison stood awkwardly by the door, his hand no longer resting on his gun. The church doors burst open. Captain Morrison strutted in, wearing his full dress uniform and an expression that could sour milk. "Where's the Apache prisoner?" he demanded, scanning the room until his eyes landed on Hope. "There, that's her, the dangerous medicine woman." A strange thing happened then. Martha Henderson, whose 6-year-old daughter had been on death's doorway that morning, stepped between the captain and Hope. "You'll have to go through me first," she said quietly. Then the blacksmith moved beside Martha. Then old Pete's son. Then Dr. Hayes, still holding Hope's herbal mixture. One by one, the townspeople formed a protective circle around the woman who'd saved their children. Captain Morrison's face went red as a boiled beet. These people don't understand military protocol. That Apache is government property. "Funny thing about property," Thomas said, stepping forward. "Last I checked, property doesn't usually save lives. People do that." Sheriff Morrison cleared his throat. "Captain, perhaps we should discuss this outside." The two brothers stepped onto the church porch, while the crowd held its collective breath. Through the windows, everyone watched an animated conversation involving lots of hand-waving and pointing. Sheriff Morrison kept gesturing toward the church, full of healthy children. Captain Morrison kept pointing toward his cavalry unit. Finally, they returned. Sheriff Morrison wore the expression of a man who just won an argument he hadn't expected to survive. "Due to extraordinary circumstances," he announced formally, "the Apache woman will remain in Cedar Ridge under protective custody." He paused. Indefinite protective custody. Captain Morrison looked like he'd swallowed a cactus, but he wasn't about to start a fight with an entire town whose children had just been saved from death. 6 months later, Hope and Thomas were still working the ranch together. People rode out from town regularly, seeking Hope's healing wisdom for everything from broken bones to difficult births. She'd become part of Cedar Ridge's fabric, woven in by the simple act of choosing compassion over fear. Sometimes salvation comes wrapped in the most unexpected packages. In Hope's case, it came with an Apache woman's healing hands and one lonely rancher's willingness to do the right thing, even when the right thing looked like the stupidest possible choice. Thomas never did find those 6 missing cattle, but he found something better. Proof that civilization isn't measured by the walls you build, but by the bridges you're willing to cross.